Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical. Thank you for stopping by. I hope the week's gone well. Sub-Saharan Africa towing an iceberg, one captain's plan to bring drinking water to 4 million people. Sloan still hasn't taken that bath at home and he isn't optimistic about Cape Town's future. Beautiful place, Cape Town. We'll never get back to the days where water's flowing all over the Cape, he says, pointing out that the city's population has grown almost 40% in the last 20 years. If the tap runs dry, the first day people will be standing in line at watering points throughout the city. The second day, if you don't get your water, well, people are killed for that. Making use of his unusual skill set, he plans to harness and tow an enormous Antarctic iceberg to South Africa and convert it into municipal water. To make it economically feasible, the iceberg would have to be big, Sloan says. Ideally, it would measure about 1,000 meters long, 500 meters wide, and 250 meters deep, and weigh 125 million tons. That would supply about 20% of Cape Town's water needs for a year. I promise you, the water situation in some parts of Africa is getting worse all the time. It's certainly not getting better. 20 or 30 years from now, I think towing icebergs will be a regular thing. Counter-revolution in Khartoum, Sudan's generals turn their guns against protesters, says The Economist. Where just weeks ago the scent of freedom was in the air, there is now the smell of smoke and cordite. The sounds of jubilant song have given way to those of automatic gunfire and the screams of the dying. In the early hours of June 3rd, Sudan's armed forces moved against pro-democracy protesters who had been holding a sit-in since April outside the army's headquarters in Khartoum. They shot and killed at least 35 civilians, over 100. All that remains of the carnival of democracy that had sprouted there are burnt tents and rubbish. The Sudanese Professionals Association, which has spearheaded the uprising since it began last December, called it a bloody massacre and announced a campaign of total civil disobedience to topple the junta that took power in Mr. Bashir's place. This is a game with huge stakes, said Harry Verhoeven, the author of a book on Sudan. Why would those who have guns give them up voluntarily? The negotiations were never serious from the beginning, says Rashid Abdi, an independent expert on Sudan based in Nairobi. The army was just playing for time. On the other side of the demonstrators are angry at the betrayal of their democratic revolution. This is not going to stop, says Reem Abbas, a Sudanese journalist in Khartoum. The protests are going to continue. Prime Minister Abiy is seen here together with his delegation arriving in Khartoum this morning for talks with the chief of the Sudanese Transitional Military Council, Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. David Pilling, dreams of freedom are being crushed on the streets of Khartoum. This was the week that Darfur came to Khartoum. For the moment at least, Sudan's dream of a peaceful revolution is over. Khartoum is in lockdown with military trucks on every corner and people terrified to leave their homes. The internet, the digital umbilical cord of the civilian uprising, has been cut. What should people do when confronted by tyranny? In an age when democracy has few champions, can a pacific uprising ever topple a regime with guns, he asks. Only a few weeks ago, the streets of Khartoum felt like a dream conjured up by the poet William Wordsworth, who wrote of the French Revolution. Bliss was it, in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. The people of Khartoum poured out night after night to celebrate the toppling of a dictator and to press for an orderly transition to civilian rule. But though Mr. Bashir has gone, the regime of terror he created has not. The most powerful man in the country is now Lieutenant General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, usually known as Hemeti, the head of the Rapid Support Forces and nominally the number 2 in the Transitional Military Council. Protesters have vowed to continue their struggle. The odds are stacked against them. The youth of Sudan and much of Africa has a faith in liberal democracy and peaceful protest that has all but evaporated in much of the world. This is a bad era in which to be a democrat without a gun. The US has lost moral authority as a democratic champion. Besides, it has long been a bit player in Sudan. The real power brokers are the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, regimes that have snuffed out democratic movements in their own countries and with no appetite to see them flourish in neighboring states. A UN resolution to condemn Sudan's military violence was blocked by China and Russia. 30 years after Chinese troops killed hundreds of students in Tiananmen Square, and 6 years after Egyptian troops shot 600 in Tahrir Square, Sudanese soldiers have done the same in their own square and their own capital. The military is already denying that anything of the sort took place. The war for amnesia has already begun. It is ultimately about who controls the street, and that's what Hemeti has done. He's cleared it, because he knew that the revolutionary contingent attains its ideal form not in the place of production, but in the street, where for a moment it stops being a cog in the technical machine and itself becomes a motor, machine of attack, in other words, a producer of speed. If the crowd disperses, goes home, does not reassemble, we say the revolution is over. And that's essentially what he was trying to make happen. African Union suspends Sudan, demands a civilian administration. South African oil shares up 8.26% year to date. That's probably about a weak currency and a strong gold price. Ace Magashuli's open disdain for President Cyril Ramaphosa and his core team has become untenable times live. ANC factions are waging war in public. The economy retracted sharply in the first quarter. Populists in the ruling party are flirting with radical economic concepts such as quantitative easing and are determined to undermine the status of the Reserve Bank. It seems there is an increase in violent crime and farm attacks. The Rand is over, it says here, close to 15, it's over 15. Eskom, Transnet, SAA are close to collapse. South Africans' concerns that the country is caught in an unavoidable downward spiral can't simply be dismissed as paranoia. For many, it feels as if SA is no more than a crisis or two away from the start of total collapse. The broad expectation that a good performance by the ANC in the May elections would lead to a renewal of Ramaphosa because the president received his mandate for renewal and economic growth has been trampled into the mud of faction politics, writes Max Duprice in the latest edition of online Afrikaans Weekly, Wêre Weekblad. This week, Magashule spooked the markets and made the Rand stumble with his televised declaration that the ANC had decided to broaden the mandate of the Reserve Bank and told the government to implement quantitative easing. He referred to it as quality easing, which makes one suspect he does not understand the concept, except that it sort of means that when the state's money dries up, he can simply print more. President Zuma tweeted, "Is there policy uncertainty? Here is a reminder of one of the resolutions at the last ANC elective conference. Zapiro, bank heist." This is in the Daily Maverick. Ivo Victor put me onto it. The Rand broke 15, lowest level against the dollar since October 15. I wrote, "The Rand gets Magashuled." And on top of this domestic dissonance, which I had not predicted, I thought Ramaphosa would get a grip on things. You've, of course, got that China emerging markets negative feedback loop phenomenon where South Africa has a very high connection. And I said this was in October, it means you've got to short the Rand. Ace Magashule's idea of the fourth industrial revolution, a 3D printer that churns out 5 Rand coins. Egyptian pound 16.7781, Egyptian EGX 30 up 5.77%, Nigerian all share down 2.87%, Ghana Stock Exchange minus 1.9% year to date. Uganda plans to invest $205 million in restoring a railway from the capital Kampala to the Kenyan border. The move will boost monthly freight capacity to 120,000 metric tons from the current 20,000 tons by 2026. Zimbabwe plans big corn imports after bad weather devastates harvest. Float an international tender to import 750,000 tons of the grain. Zimbabwe's corn crop is expected to plummet 54% this year. Economist, unless President Magufuli changes course, one day the only elephant left in the Selous may be a white one. Like Isaiah Berlin's hedgehogs, who knew one big thing, Magufuli, Tanzania's president, sees economic growth through a single prism. The state, and the state alone, delivers prosperity. Cash has been poured into Air Tanzania, the loss-making state-owned airline, which has recently bought half a dozen new planes, including a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Passengers arriving on it will be able to whiz across the country in high-speed trains if things go to plan. Some 30 infrastructure projects are in the works. Dodoma, Tanzania's capital in name only, is being overhauled. It will have Africa's largest stadium. A hydroelectric dam in the south is more modestly conceived. It will merely be the continent's joint second biggest. Such mega projects go down well domestically. They foster pride and are taken as evidence that the president is serious about giving Tanzania a modern economy by 2025. President who won the election in 2015 by the smallest margin in Tanzania's history. There are also potential vote winners. Donors and investors are less enthusiastic. They have nothing against infrastructure-driven development, but it needs to be well-planned, carefully implemented, and make financial sense. They worry that Mr. Magufuli's schemes often fail on all three counts. Already, several had made faltering starts. Mr. Magufuli's vision sometimes trumps forethought. When he abolished state school fees, too few teachers had been trained to meet the surge in demand. I have teachers teaching classes of 130 under a tree, complains one headmaster. Similarly, government ministries have been told to move from Dar es Salaam to Dodoma, yet the buildings meant to house them are under scaffolding, and the city's expansion will not be completed for another decade. Mere details, scoffs the president, who has not moved. Stay under a mango tree. Even the president's own officials are too scared to offer candid advice. Some Western diplomats say that they asked to break bad news to the president by aides, too timid to do so. The IMF reckons the economy will grow by just 4% in 2019, 1 percentage point above population growth. If you look at all the Kenyan businesses that have businesses in Tanzania, I can't think of one, except maybe EABL, but that was a turnaround story. And beer, after all, sells everywhere. In Tanzania, investors, I said at the end of last year, are having to price in a Magufuli haircut. And on that point of Tanzania, have a listen to my interview with MG Vasanji. Latest Central Bank of Kenya data shows that there was 963.7 billion shillings worth of outstanding T-bills by May 24. It's $1 trillion shillings, a lot of money. Nairobi All Shares up 7.68% this year, trading on a P of 11.91. NSE 20s down 4.36%. This year on Metropole this evening, I got Laura Chait. She's the CEO of CIO East Africa and a very effervescent person. Looking forward to that interview to talk about fintech, as it were. Thank you.